Okay. I think that's everyone in, is it now? Yeah.
Yeah, that's everyone.
Okay, right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the IOSH South Midlands branch meeting. We've got a wonderful speaker tonight who's spending some time with us regarding fire safety legislation and fire risk assessment, and Colin Todd. We'll be catching up with him in a moment. We've just got a few points just to address really for the programme. We've got myself, I'm Kerry Edwards, the Secretary for the IOSH South Midlands branch. Our chair is not available at the moment for our meeting tonight, so myself and Scott Crichton will be with us all and pulling through this programme for you. So it's going to be a recorded session tonight, and we will be putting this onto the intranet for the website, the microsite for our branch. So, you know, it will be there for people to access. Any questions, please pop them into the chat facility. As normal, as everyone is used to this, I'm sure by now. And we do have one or two questions that have been sent prior, so we'll go through those as well. There's going to be some updates. I'll just pop through to you and a branch overview. And then we have Colin Todd from CS Todd and Associates doing his talk. And we hope to finish, I'm sure, Colin, by 8:30, but you know, we'll be governed by questions as well on this. So let's get this moving. Just some IOSH news. What we're going to do is just to inform you about various opportunities really that may be of use to you, the mentoring. There are quite a few of our members in the branch that are technical grade and graduate, and we are here as a branch to help you with your mentor, you know, if you need a mentor, and to guide you through the IPD process, our professional mentoring. So do get in touch with us, and we're here to just help you get in touch with those people that may be of need to you. We've also got webinars that are on the site, as you all know anyway, and find those. Any problems, so get in touch with us at the branch. Now, Colin is here, and he will go through his introduction, I'm sure, but he is an expert witness and author, delivers masses of training, and he's on several committees. So, and awarded an MBE, I didn't know that, Colin, from you know, Visual Services to Fire Safety. So, any questions following and through the chat, then please do. And I'll just come out to share and then allow Colin to his presentation there. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Hopefully everybody can now see my screen, can they? My slide presentation, yeah? No.
Try that again.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
That's a no.
Oh, that's a relief. I'm too old for technology. I looked in the mirror last night. I saw an old duffer do this same presentation. It took him an hour and 10 minutes. And so I decided I would do much better tonight and do it in an hour. So we'll see how we get on. So first of all, thanks very much to the South Midlands branch of IOSH for inviting me tonight. I've been asked to talk at high level, if you like, about the current climate in which we work in fire safety, and then I will talk about a bit more granular detail. In terms of the climate in which we're working, it's all a bit mad, really. One of my colleagues was keeping a diary for a while about all the sort of mad things that were happening, and then he gave up because there was just too many. And to begin with, we had ministers telling us that we all had to be very prescriptive, and that people couldn't be trusted and go back to prescription. to some extent. And now ministers are telling us, well, for goodness sake, get a grip, get things in proportion. And so we don't know really where we are. But in terms of the current climate, I thought I'd share a quotation with you because I love this quotation. And I'll break one of my own rules, which is never read what's on the PowerPoint slides, because that's really boring for people because they can read it for themselves. And if all you wanted to do was read it out, you could have just sent it to them and they needn't have bothered coming along. But I hope you'll indulge me if I read this quotation verbatim. It's quite a long quotation. It goes over 3 slides. Before I get to that, maybe I should just explain what I hope to do in the hour or hour and 10 minutes. And I discussed with the organisers 3 tranches, really. First of all, an update for people on fire safety legislation in England. Then some comparisons of fire safety in England with that in the devolved regions of the UK. And then thirdly, big hot topic, which I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on, but that will belie the importance of the topic, and that is the competence of fire risk assessors, and also what's being expected today of fire risk assessors and the fire risk assessments they produce. But I'll start off with the quotation, which is this: a ratchet which serves to increase fire safety provisions rather than otherwise is the rare but significant occurrence of major fires. Public attention is attracted quite rightly to any kind of tragedy which causes multiple deaths. Public tolerance of such incidents is low, and I think we would say rightly low, even where on a statistical basis, the risk to any individual of becoming involved in such an event may be extremely small. As a result, major fires are the subject of intensive investigation and analysis. The outcome of such studies is generally to identify the major contributory factors which led to the incident becoming as serious as it did. The investigation is likely to be conducted on several levels, concerned with details of the initiation of and communication about the event, the behaviour of survivors, victims, and firefighters, and theoretical and possibly experimental studies of fire and smoke behaviour. The results of all of these studies is likely to emerge as a set of recommendations for improvements in an attempt to ensure that such an incident could not be repeated. The problem is that the results are unlikely to be formulated as a series of alternatives, the implementation of any one of which would have avoided the tragedy, but rather as a set of measures which must be adopted as a whole. In other words, we tend to chuck the kitchen sink at it. This approach, whilst very well intentioned, leads to new sets of golden rules because of a failure of rational analysis. Now, when I do things face to face, I normally pose a question after that quote, and I'm not sure actually how you do that virtually, so I probably won't. But the question I normally pose is, was this a commentary on the post-Grenfell response? And the answer is absolutely not. This was from a paper, a brilliant paper, by the way, called Magic Numbers and Golden Rules, which is a paper presented by Margaret Law, who I tend to think of as the sort of mother of modern fire engineering. She originally came from what was then the Government Fire Research Station, then subsumed ultimately and translated into different organizations, became BRE, and Paula Beaver, both ultimately of Arup. And the paper was presented at the 4th International Symposium on Fire Safety Science, something like, if I can do the maths quickly enough, 27 years ago. So there's nothing new in life. Keep the turn-ups on your trousers and they'll come back in fashion. And afterwards, Margaret said of her paper, it was presented to an audience that was predominantly made up of researchers who generally feel they ought to be interested in the work of practitioners, but in reality weren't. And one of the things one of the things I loved about this presentation was something that she called the baby in the Buick. And at the time, again, talking about the fact that, there's nothing new in life. We go around in circles or as cycles. At the time, there was a lot of concern about car park fires. People talk about car park fires today after one or two recent ones. And people were saying, well, for goodness sake, we can't have unprotected steelwork now in car parks with half an hour fire resistance. We need 4 hours fire resistance for the elements of construction. And when people tried to rationalize that and asked, yeah, but why? It was said, well, people leave their children in their cars when they go shopping. Now, I'm not sure that's quite legal, and I'm not sure that people actually do it. So Margaret proposed the baby in the Buick, and she drew this little cartoon for the conference in which here's half-hour fire resistant construction for the elements of structure, and the car's on fire, or maybe the adjacent car's on fire, and the baby's not safe. So you up the elements of construction to 4 hours, the car's on fire, or the adjacent car's on fire, and now we're to believe the baby is safe. And it took those at the conference a sort of minute or so, and then they suddenly got it and burst out laughing. So with that sort of background, what's happening in terms of fire safety legislation in England? And in this first tranche of this little talk, what I want to cover, so because I'm covering a number of things that'll be at fairly high level, first of all, changes to the building regulations 2010. More importantly, maybe changes to approved document B, which supports the building regulations. The long-awaited, and I'll explain why I describe it as such, although you probably know, Fire Safety Act 2021. What I call the Fire Safety England Regulations 2021, not least because there is no title for these regulations as such, but these are the regulations that will implement the findings of the Phase 1 report of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. And you might be aware that it was promised by government that regulations would be implemented, we brought into force to implement the findings of the Phase 1 report before the second anniversary of the report. Now, you might have just noticed, there's a little chap who finds it all incredibly fascinating. Better than The Simpsons or whatever. You might have just noticed that we've just passed the second anniversary of the Phase 1 report, but there are still no new regulations. We don't even have a title. I keep suggesting to the Home Office that the Fire Safety England regulations would be quite elegant, because we've got the Fire Safety Scotland regulations and the Fire Safety Regulations Northern Ireland. So to me, that title would work, but whether they'll pay any attention or not, I have no idea. And then we've got the Building Safety Bill that's coming along, and many of you have perhaps been following. Okay, so if we start off with the changes to the building regulations, the big showstopper, of course, was the amendment to Regulation 7, which is really about workmanship. But this was the so-called ban on combustible cladding that applies now to relevant buildings. And relevant buildings are buildings over 18 meters in height that comprise blocks of flats, of course, student accommodation, care homes, don't see many care homes over 18 meters in height, hospitals, dormitories and boarding schools, but not hotels or hostels. And the requirement is for construction, external wall construction that's as near as anything non-combustible. People call it a ban on combustible construction. Technically, it's not quite, but it's as near as anything. It's construction that is classified under BSEN 13501-1 as either A1 or A2S1D0. And it's more or less non-combustible construction. So that was the big showstopper, very prescriptive. This was a return to prescription. I opened Fire Safety Week I did a keynote presentation with a colleague from Scottish Government just after this happened, and people from the Netherlands and America were coming to me afterwards, and they were saying, did you say the UK has returned to prescription? We can't believe it. And I said, well, in this one respect, yes, there has been a return to prescription. So no fire engineering solutions possible, no alternative solutions, no large-scale fire test, which was previously acceptable to prove that combustible construction would satisfy the requirements of the building regulations in terms of fire spread over external wall. Only one way of doing it, non-combustible construction. So that was a big showstopper in terms of changes to the building regulations in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The changes to approved document B that supports the regulations, well, again, looking at just the big hitting points, the trigger height for sprinkler protection of new blocks of flats or flats within new blocks of flats was reduced from 30 meters to 11 meters. And then very sensible recommendation, wayfinding signage in blocks of flats over 11 meters in height. This was a carbon copy of what had already been implemented in Scotland. And when I say wayfinding signage, many of you will know what I mean. This is floor numbers and flat numbers to assist the fire and rescue service, so that if they use the firefighting staircase or use any staircase, they will be able to orientate themselves as to the floor number. And bear in mind, people on a treble 9 call might just give a flat number. They'll be assisted with the flat numbers. Furthermore, when they open the doors of a firefighting lift, as soon as they open the lift doors, they should see this information as well, the floor number and the flat numbers. And in a way, that really follows not just Grenfell Tower, but the fire at Shirley Towers in Hampshire, in which 2 firefighters died. And this was a recommendation of the coroner, which, interesting enough, was implemented in Scotland before England. So that's building regulations, the key changes that have occurred. Then we have the Fire Safety Act 2021, received the royal assent on the 29th of April this year, and in England is not yet in force because it needs a statutory instrument to wake it up. Again, we were expecting a statutory instrument probably last month, but it hasn't happened as yet. And there is no date yet for implementation, no date for the Act to actually come into force in England. It came into force in Wales on the 1st of October 2021. Really, the Fire Safety Act, it's a very short act. It deals with 3 issues for blocks of flats, namely the building structure, the flat entrance doors, and external walls, claddings, and attachments. I'll come back to that in a second. I'll just get rid of the very last point because it's a fairly minor one, and it's a kind of miscellaneous requirement under the Act in relation to so-called risk-based guidance. And it's a bit like, well, heck, health and safety practitioners understand ACOPS much better than I do. It's a bit ACOPy, if there's such an adjective. So if people comply with so-called risk-based guidance, it will tend in any proceedings to establish compliance with the regulations. Non-compliance with risk-based guidance will tend towards establishing non-compliance. So aside from that one, all the Act does is it so-called clarifies that 3 things fall within the scope of the regulatory reform fire safety order. Now, I said so-called clarifies. I'll come back to that point, that caveat in a minute about so-called clarification. But this is what it purports to do. It clarifies that the building structure falls within the scope of the fire safety order. This is for blocks of flats, by the way. That flat entrance doors in blocks of flats are part of the fire safety order, and any external walls, cladding and attachments, by which it means things like balconies, are part of the fire safety order. Now, taking those points in turn, I don't know how many of you are actually practitioners in fire safety. I saw one or two faces I recognized early on when people first logged on. So I know some of you are. Lest you be frightened by this term building structure and think that it means that fire risk assessments will need intrusive inspections or that you're being asked to comment on the fire resistance of the elements of structure of the building. That's not the case. Those drafting the guidance, those drafting the legislation, when it was explained to them by the sector, the fire sector, do you realize building structure means the things that hold the building up? They said, oh, no, that's not what we mean at all. So there will need to be a clarification of the clarification. And to that end, the Minister has already made a statement to the House. Lest you not regard Hansard as your normal bedtime reading, if anybody wants the reference to Hansard to keep up your sleeve, it might be quite important one day. I'll happily send anybody the reference to Hansard. But the Minister has explained that this is not talking about intrusive inspections. This is a visual inspection of the compartmentation. So to me, it's almost the status quo that any fire risk assessor worth their salt would have been poking their heads in risers and looking at the fire stopping. If they happened to see unprotected steelwork when they did so, well, I would hope they would mention that, but they're not expected to go poking around into the structure of the building or carrying out intrusive inspections. So nothing too much to worry about there. Flat entrance doors, well, I don't know any, better watch what I say. I don't know any fire risk assessor whose opinion I would respect, who would not have known that flat entrance doors were always part of the fire safety order. If you do a fire risk assessment for a block of flats, it's probably the most important thing you look at, the fire resisting nature and self-closing nature of the flat entrance doors, certainly on a sampling basis. And in fact, the Fire Industry Association, of which I'm a board member, formed a special interest group to prepare guidance for member companies on the Fire Safety Act, when it was still a bill, on the likely requirements about external walls with which the Fire Industry Association take issue, but I'll come back to that point. That guidance document, by the way, is freely available on the Fire Industry Association website. But the point I was going to make is that the special interest group that was formed within the Fire Industry Association to prepare that guidance document, when we did a little tally around the table, that group were responsible for carrying out 40,000 fire risk assessments for blocks of flats every year. And not one of them, for 1 second, ever thought that flat entrance doors were not part of the fire safety order premise, the common parts were part of the fire safety order. So that's a bit of a non-issue for the vast majority, if not all, fire risk assessors. The biggie, of course, is external walls. And I don't believe that for a minute that the sector ever believed that external walls were part of the fire safety order premises. And that's why my own opinion is that this is not a clarification. I think it's very disingenuous of government to call it a clarification, but it's really an extension of scope that for political reasons has been called a clarification with all sorts of unintended consequences. The view of the Fire Industry Association, which again is fairly public, is if that's right, we estimate that 450,000 fire risk assessments are at a stroke no longer suitable and sufficient. But that's a matter for debate. And in a way, it's water under the bridge, or it will be when the Fire Safety Act comes into force, because it will leave no doubt that external walls are part of the fire safety order provisions when you do a fire risk assessment for a block of flats. And the advice of the Fire Industry Association to member companies is write it out as an exclusion from your fire risk assessment unless you really feel you're competent to advise on external wall construction, which the vast majority of fire risk assessors would not claim to have expertise in. It does mean that it's almost created a new discipline, a new profession of external wall assessors. And to help that new profession, there will be a new PSI publication, which my own practice is contracted to draft, but along with a number of other leading practices in our profession, because we didn't want it to be just our views. So we've worked together with about 4 other practices to produce a publicly available specification, or PAS, which BSI will publish as PAS 9980. And this will be a code of practice for assessment or appraisal of external wall construction and cladding in blocks of flats. Very, very focused, very tailor-made, and will be published, we hope, in December. So on to the Fire Safety England regulations, and remember that's just my name for them, because the official name hasn't been announced. The regulations have not yet been laid. And as I said before, these are the regulations that will implement the recommendations of the phase 1 report of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. Now, when this presentation was planned, I did say to the Home Office, I'd like to talk about the new regulations on the 2nd of November. That will be all right, won't it? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. They're bound to be in long before then. So I spoke to them yesterday and said, can I tell people what the new regulations are going to say? And they said, no, you most certainly cannot, because they're not even enforced yet. So I apologize for that, but I'm only the messenger. I did say, can I tell the delegates when they will come into force then? And they said, no, you can't, because we don't know. The best I can do for you is give you some very strong pointers as to what the regulations are bound to cover. Bearing in mind, they're bound to cover the phase 1 recommendations of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and they will obviously be reflective of a public consultation that was issued by the Home Office about a year ago, asking the public what their view was on proposals for these regulations. So putting these two things together, what the public inquiry said and what the government said they proposed to do subject to public opinion, we're bound to see requirements for evacuation plans for all blocks of flats. That's not going to be terribly difficult. For many blocks of flats, it will be walk out your flat entrance door, go down the stair, out the front door and go down the pub. There's your evacuation plan. But the evacuation plans for high-rise buildings, well, the proposal was that you'll have to provide these to the fire and rescue service. So that's likely to, there's likely to be a requirement that looks something like that. Information for residents, certain information for residents for all blocks of flats. More power to the elbow of that one. I first started looking at fire safety in blocks of flats for London boroughs back in the 1980s. Obviously, I was only 15 at the time. And one recommendation I put in every single, we didn't call them fire risk assessments in those days, but audit report was, why not prepare a little fire safety booklet for residents, telling them not just about the fire procedures in the building, but how to prevent fires, because people who live in blocks of flats have a disproportionate number of fires to people who live in nice 5-bedroom detached houses and leafy suburbs. And I don't know, with hindsight, maybe I was just angling to get to write the guidance, because at the time there wasn't the guidance available from Home Office websites and so on. And to be fair to myself, I don't think I wanted the work commercially. I thought it'd be a fun thing to do. And it's one recommendation that nobody ever paid any attention to. And I used to say to London boroughs, it's actually far more information, far more important, I should say, to give information to residents than counting the number of hinges on fire doors and worrying about whether there's 2 hinges or 3 hinges, which will make a slight difference to the fire assistance, but will not make any difference to the number of deaths from fire in blocks of flats. But nobody paid too much attention to that. After Lakenall House in 2009, we thought we'd sort of cracked this point. We thought we got the message home because the 6 people who died in Lakenall House might have fared very much better if residents at Lakenall House had been told what the fire strategy was for the building, what the evacuation arrangements were, what the balconies were actually for. And they didn't have that information. And the coroner identified that very readily in the inquest into the 6 deaths. And so guidance we produced after Lakenall House said, for goodness sake, engage with residents, give them information. And here we are having to say the same thing after Grenfell Tower, except government is going to have to say, well, you've been told as often and you're not doing it, so now we're going to make you do it. And I think that's absolutely fair. Premises information boxes for high-rise blocks of flats. You're all familiar with PIBs, I'm sure. Testing of lifts provided for use by the Fire and Rescue Service in high-rise blocks of flats. Many of you will be aware that on the night of the fire at Grenfell Tower, the firefighter switch didn't work. And so it's a matter of debate as to what extent it was tested. But obviously, the inquiry would like to see a legislative requirement for testing of firefighters' lifts, and of course the return to ground switch, the firefighter's switch. Probably inspection and testing of other measures installed under building regulations for use by the Fire and Rescue Service. So fire rising mains, for example, in high-rise blocks of flats. There is a requirement, or rather there's likely to be a requirement, there's a proposed requirement that information on external walls be given to the Fire and Rescue Service in the case of high-rise blocks of flats. The devil, it will really be in the detail. How much information do you give the Fire and Rescue Service? How much information can you actually get yourself about the external walls of the building? How much can the Fire and Rescue Service use in any practical way? That's still to be hammered out. Routine checking of self-closing devices on flat entrance doors, big issue for the housing sector. Again, many of you probably know that the public inquiry recommended that all self-closing devices on flat entrance doors and blocks of flats, sorry, high-rise blocks of flats, be checked every 3 months. Now, just have a go at that. It would be like painting. You need an army of people doing nothing else. As you know, it'd be a new profession of self-closing device checkers, and it'd be like painting the Forth Bridge. So, what will the Home Office response to that be? We need to wait and see whether they would go along with such frequent checking of self-closing devices. But representations have been made to government by the housing sector and the fire sector, including the Fire Industry Association, that 3 monthly checking is totally impracticable. Floor signs, I think I meant to put an exclamation mark there rather than a question mark, because government actually did say in their response to the public consultation, we are going to ask for floor signs. So the requirements that would be applicable to new blocks under approved document B, we can see readily becoming retrospective for existing high-rise blocks. So that's the Fire Safety England regulations. There is one whole other issue that you could spend the rest of the night talking about, and that's legislation on personal emergency evacuation plans. There were quite a number of disabled people tragically died in the fire at Grenfell Tower. The public inquiry have recommended personal emergency evacuation plans for residents of high-rise blocks of flats. Not sure where that leaves residents of low-rise blocks of flats if they're disabled. The government went out with a special consultation. They called it a mini consultation, specifically on this subject. That consultation was open from the 8th of June this year until the 19th of July. And the proposals of government were that for residents, disabled residents who self-identify in high-rise blocks of flats, it should be the responsibility of the responsible person to prepare personal emergency evacuation plans for them. But the sting in the tail of the government proposal was that these PEEPs should not involve any intervention by the fire and rescue service. And so the question is, what is a PEEP for a disabled resident in a block of flats with no staff that doesn't involve the fire and rescue service? And thus far, there's been complete radio silence from government on the findings of the consultation. Normally, after a public consultation, you at least get an analysis of the responses so that people know what the response of the public was. We haven't got an analysis of the responses. We haven't got any response from government. We don't have any idea as to whether there will be new legislation or won't be new legislation requiring PEEPs or what it might look like. So at the moment, we're in complete limbo on the subject. Okay. Lastly, under legislation, the Building Safety Bill, I feel a bit of a fraud talking about the Building Safety Bill because it changes so often, I can never keep up with it. And I'd kind of resolved not to worry about it until it actually happened and someone told us what it would look like. But I do have to try and keep an eye on it, and I have tried to keep the slides up to date, but it does change regularly. It is expected, or this is a government statement, it's expected to get the Royal Assent possibly mid-2022. Personally, I don't believe that. I think it'll be held up in the Lords, but that remains to be seen. I'm prepared to take bets on it with anyone. And probably come into force in mid-2023. In other words, there'll be a year afterwards, a transitional period. And the scope will start with so-called higher risk residential buildings. What's a higher risk residential building? Well, as it stands at present, for the purpose of the bill, that would be blocks of flats of 18 meters or 7 stories, including the ground. In other words, more, or rather, start again, 18 meters or more than 7 stories, so more than just a 6-story block of flats, so 7 stories or more. And any high-rise care homes or hospitals and high-rise student accommodation. So these are the so-called HRRBs at the present that it'll start with, but the important one, of course, being blocks of flats. There's a lot of confusion between high risk and high rise. We could spend the rest of the night talking about that as well. If I can offer a personal opinion, high-rise blocks of flats are not high risk. And in fact, there are very few deaths from fire in high-rise blocks of flats. And when they do occur, they invariably occur in the flat of fire origin. That's why Grenfell Tower was, I can't describe it, I can't find words strongly enough to describe the obscenity of the anomaly that is Grenfell Tower, but it is an anomaly nevertheless. There have been about 200 deaths from fire in blocks of flats, regardless of height, since the Grenfell Tower disaster, and probably none of them, but certainly if there were any, it would be single numbers, occurred in the flat of fire origin. not, and the Building Safety Bill won't do anything about that. The Building Safety Act won't do anything about that. In Scotland, Scottish Government have actually done a study to find out if there has been any death from fire in a block of flats beyond the flat of fire origin. And in 10 years in Scotland, there has not been a single death beyond the flat of fire origin. Now, I say 10 years because it can't go back any further because there wasn't a Scottish Fire and Rescue Service before then. So Scottish Government are now funding a study, an independent study that will go back a bit further, looking at old Home Office data when there were 8 fire and rescue services in Scotland, to see whether there has been a single death from fire in any block of flats beyond the flat of fire origin for 20 years. And the young researcher is a good friend, very enthusiastic, very committed lad. And I said to him, you're not going to find any in 20 years either. And he was all crestfallen and said, I'm not going to find any. And I said, no, I very much doubt it. And if you do, it would be single numbers and very small single numbers at that. But why are you depressed about that? Because a nil return is a finding in itself, a very important finding. But I did say, don't get all excited because you aren't going to find any. The Building Safety Bill will give the Secretary of State powers to extend the scope to other types of building. You must know that it has brought about a new building safety regulator on the basis if building control have had some problems in doing their job properly, don't give them extra resources to do their job properly, throw away the baby with the bathwater and start again. We saw that happen after Piper Alpha. Get rid of the regulator, bring in a new regulator, that'll sort things, will it? But anyway, we have a new building safety regulator within the HSE, headed by a new Chief Inspector of Buildings, Peter Baker, who comes from HSE. The bill would give power to the Secretary of State to impose competency requirements on those working in and carrying out work in higher risk, I'll get it right in a minute, higher risk residential buildings. It defines three, or within the whole structure, there are 3 gateway points defined. Gateway 1 is planning, gateway 2 is construction, and that would be your building reg stage, and then gateway 3 occupation, and then there can be requirements imposed on each gateway. This was Dame Judith Hackett's golden thread. There will be an accountable person. I'm not quite sure, I can't see really what the difference is between the accountable person and the responsible person under the fire safety order. And anytime I ask government, they can never seem to explain it to me. So I presume they must be very similar. The accountable person has to put together a building safety case as to why the building is safe. And that will require appointment of building safety managers. I don't know what the health and safety profession is at the moment. I assume health and safety practitioners are all earning a healthy living. But if you want to change your profession and become a building safety manager, you can't employ building safety managers at the moment at 65,000 a year. You struggle to appoint building safety managers at 75,000 a year and keep on going, and you might find some building safety managers. Because there are so-called early adopters of this legislation who are, some of the London boroughs, for example, are trying to recruit building safety managers, but I'm quite serious, it can't be done at 65,000. What's this building safety manager going to achieve? It could be a corporate building safety manager, by the way, but it can be a person, a natural person as opposed to a legal person. It's a kind of building safety Superman. I don't actually understand how he's going to save any of the 200 people that would have died post-Grenfell, because they all died because of problems in their own flats. And probably for 65, 75, 85,000 a year, you could employ 2 social workers and call them resident fire safety engagement officers. and go and knock on the doors of vulnerable people and give them smoke alarms and fire-resistant bedding, then you might actually do some good in reducing deaths. But I struggle to see what all this will do. Will prevent the societal death fire, as they're known, the large, very rare multiple fatality fires that the public won't tolerate. But what it will do to national fire statistics on deaths from fire in blocks of flats will probably make no impact whatsoever. Before occupation, the accountable person will have to apply for a building assessment certificate. If you're familiar with the bill, by the way, I haven't used the wrong word. You might know these as building safety certificates. That was the first name. Then it changed to building assurance certificates. And now in the latest version of the bill, they're called building assessment certificates. All of this will apply retrospectively to existing higher risk residential buildings, and of course then to new build. A resident engagement strategy, great. There should always have been such a thing. Well, as I said before, it's coming with legislation, both in the Building Safety Act and possibly the Fire Safety England regulations, as I call them. The Act would amend the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985 to impose duties on residents. Lots of those in the property managing sector would be quite glad of that, because they have difficulty at the moment getting leaseholders to do anything, and they end up holding the baby themselves, like changing flat entrance doors. The accountable person would be given the right of entry and have a power to issue notices, the power to charge residents for building safety work. There'll be a new homes ombudsman to whom you can complain. And at the planning stage, that would be Gateway 1, a requirement for a fire statement. What's the fire statement? Well, people are still feeling their way as to what one of these would look like. A bit like a fire strategy. We already have this requirement in London, who've kind of jumped the gun and trialed it in London. So that's a romp through most of the legislation. The one last thing that the Building Safety Act would do would be to amend the fire safety order. Again, if you have been following the bill, this next bullet point is not a mistake. It was in section 134. They've changed all the numbering, so it's now section 136. And section 136 would amend the fire safety order to require all findings of fire risk assessments to be recorded. At the moment, the order only requires the significant findings of a fire risk assessment to be recorded. This would now say all findings. It only kicks the can down the road a little bit, because there was lots of debate. What's a significant finding? Well, what's a finding, you might say. But anyway, that's a proposal. It would require that fire risk assessors should be competent. We all rubbed our hands with that and said, about time too, because to begin with, we thought what it meant was third-party certification of fire risk assessors who carry out work in higher risk residential buildings. It doesn't mean that at all. The government have no proposals to make any yardstick of competence mandatory or any certification or registration mandatory. It's simply a way of being able to prosecute people, you might say, if it could be established that they appointed a fire risk assessor who was not competent. So that's a bit disappointing, really, a bit of a damp squib. At present, there's a requirement to record fire safety arrangements under the fire safety order. Then this would apply to all buildings, but at the moment it's only smaller companies are exempted from having to record the fire safety arrangements. That exemption would go. By the way, when I said fire risk assessors should be competent for higher risk residential buildings, the Building Safety Bill is talking about all fire risk assessors being competent regardless of the work they do. But again, as I said, without third-party certification. It will complement the legislation that implements the phase 1 findings of the Grenfell Tower inquiry to require residents and flats to be given yet further fire safety information beyond the scope of that probably required under the new secondary regulations that will come into force. Where RPs change, there'll be a requirement for transfer of information from one RP to another. And for the higher risk residential buildings, there'll be a requirement for people to cooperate with the accountable person. So a few quite important things there for us in the fire sector, as and when the fire safety order becomes amended. So that's the major tranche of what I'm doing tonight on the changes to legislation. I was asked in a second tranche to talk about fire legislation in the devolved regions. Well, Wales is quite simple. The big difference is that, of course, it's been the case for some time now that all new residential buildings in Wales have to be sprinklered. The Fire Safety Act, as I mentioned, is already in force. I did prepare a slide in Northern Ireland, and I think possibly my administrative colleagues who put the package together thought it was an error, because I did have a slide that said Northern Ireland and it was blank. And I was going to say there's the changes in Northern Ireland, but I don't have that slide, I noticed. So there have been no changes yet in Northern Ireland. I love the people of Northern Ireland because, first of all, they buy strangers pints of Guinness in pubs. And so I love them for that. But I also love the fact there are canny people who watch things all going wrong on the mainland in terms of legislation and then bring in their own legislation a few years later and get it right first time. So there are no changes to the building regulations in Northern Ireland at the present time. There are no changes to the equivalent of approved document B, although there is work going on in that respect. And there are no changes to the legislation that affects existing buildings. Scotland is quite different. There always have been many differences in the building regulations in Scotland compared to those in England. Scotland have always jealously guarded their own system of building regulation and the technical requirements that support the regulations. But the common parts of blocks of flats are outside the equivalent of the fire safety order, always have been. And interestingly enough, well, I demonstrated from the statistics that there's no bodies on the streets in Scotland because we don't have fire risk assessments in Scotland for the common parts of blocks of flats. So there's no equivalent in Scotland to the Fire Safety Act, no equivalent to the Fire Safety England regulations. What there is in Scotland is a proposal I made to a ministerial advisory group that I sat on in Scotland, looking at the response of Scotland to the Grenfell Tower disaster, and that is evacuation alert systems for the fire and rescue service in new high-rise blocks of flats. Now, this is not earth-shattering because they only build between 6 and 8 new high-rise blocks of flats in Scotland every year. But it has been accepted under the technical handbooks that support the building regulations that any new high-rise blocks of flats in Scotland should have facilities whereby the fire and rescue service can trigger an evacuation warning in any flat they want, not any individual flat, but in any group of flats, such as a single story, or if they want to throw their hand down all the switches for all the stories, the whole block if they want to. They specifically don't have a master evacuate control. Fire service didn't want that because they felt that young officers in charge might hit it a bit too readily. So they can evacuate a floor at a time typically, but they can carry on evacuating every floor if they wish. Scottish Government persuaded the British Standards Institution that they should produce a British standard in double quick time to support this new legislative requirement. And there was a British standard produced in virtually record time. Scottish Government paid my practice to prepare a first draft. And then they gave it to BSI and said, right, here's one we've done earlier. You finish it off. And so we were able to get that standard produced very quickly. Generally in Scotland, I would describe the Scottish response as more measured. And that's not just because of the accent with which I speak. And in any case, I don't actually practice in Scotland to any great extent. I never have, other than the fact that we do get some work in Scotland, but I'm based in the south of England. And it's easy to say that because Holyrood is 450 miles from Grenfell Tower. Westminster and the headquarters of the Home Office and what's now known as Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities is only a couple of miles away. So it's easy to say that Scotland can be a bit more measured. I would like to tell you that the building regulations in Scotland did not change by a single word, but they did. They changed by a single word, literally. I won't bore you with what the word is. It's of no real significance. There was an editorial change to one requirement under the regulations that involved deleting one word. So there's been no return to prescription for external wall construction, no ban of combustible cladding. You can still use the full-scale fire test to establish the safety of combustible cladding for high-rise blocks of flats in Scotland. Having said that, that is under review at the present time. So I can't promise that will always be the case, but that's subject to consultation at the present time. There are major changes to the equivalent of approved document B, that's the technical handbooks that support the Building Scotland regulations. And in some cases, the requirements for cladding have been made much more stringent. There was no Hackett review, of course, in Scotland, so there was no throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The government advice on existing buildings with combustible cladding is, I would say, slightly more measured, but they have an equivalent to what in England is called the Consolidated Advice Note. Since 2010, though, bearing in mind that Scotland are well aware that people who die in any dwelling die because of a fire in their own dwelling. Since 2010, the guidance under building regulations in Scotland in terms of smoke alarms in the home has been more stringent than guidance for new dwellings in England. So in England, we can still build dwellings, be they flats or houses, with just smoke alarms in the hallway or upstairs landing in a two-storey house. That would not satisfy building regulations in Scotland, where there's a requirement under the tech handbook, technically advice in the technical handbook, to install a smoke alarm in the lounge and a heat alarm in the kitchen in any new dwelling. Why the lounge and the kitchen? Well, the lounge is the room in which most fatal fires start. It's not where the bodies are found, but it's where the fatal fire actually started. And 54% of domestic fires start in the kitchen. So by covering the lounge and the kitchen, you cover the room in which most fatal fires start and the room in which most fires start. Similarly, for rented properties in England, in rented properties, private sector rented properties, the landlord need only provide, let's say it's a two-storey rented house, you could provide a battery-operated PP3 battery-operated smoke alarm on the ground floor and a PP3 battery-operated smoke alarm on the first floor, and they don't even need to be interlinked. So people in the bedroom on the first floor probably won't hear the smoke alarm on the ground floor anyway. In rented sector properties in Scotland, then they need to be mains battery, or they need to be 10-year tamper-proof battery. They need to be interlinked, and you need the smoke alarm in the lounge and the heat alarm in the kitchen, just as you would for new dwellings. And then from February of next year, really a very bold step, legislation in Scotland will require every dwelling in Scotland to have smoke alarms in the circulation spaces, smoke alarms in the lounge, and heat alarms in the kitchen. And now you might ask, how are they going to enforce that? Are they going to kick down people's doors and say, show us your smoke alarm in the lounge? we could go into that if we needed to, but the fact is it will be a legislative requirement in Scotland that all homes are protected with smoke alarms to the standard I've just described. Currently in Scotland, all new high-rise domestic, forget that currently. The previous, prior to Grenfell, high-rise blocks of flats in Scotland were required to be sprinklered, as were sheltered housing complexes and care homes. So I should have amended that slide. So prior to Grenfell, just to be clear, Scotland under building regulations since 2004 required sprinkler protection of care homes, sheltered housing, and blocks of flats over 18 metres in height. From March 2021, all new blocks of flats in Scotland, regardless of height, need to be sprinklered. Even what in Scotland are referred to as cottage flats, they're referred to as other things around the country. In the southwest of England, they're called half houses. In the home counties of England, they're called masonettes. But it's a situation where you look at what looks like two semi-detached houses. You've got two front doors. One front door leads into a ground floor flat. The other front door leads to a staircase that leads to a flat on the first floor. So you've got one flat on top of the other. They're often referred to as masonettes in England, although architecturally, I'm not sure that's the right term. But even these types of flats now need to be sprinkled. So all flats in blocks of flats in Scotland now need to be sprinkled. Previously, it was blocks over 18 metres in height. And then another bold step in Scotland. From March 2021, all new social housing dwellings need to be sprinklered. Now, that's quite bold, because it's the first time I can think of that building regulations requirements have been dependent on tenure. This only applies to social housing, and the reason is because, of course, we all know that fire frequency is very strongly linked to deprivation. And anybody from the fire service will tell you it would be very, very rare for them to go to a fatal in a nice 5-bedroom detached house in a leafy suburb where the householder is a lawyer or a doctor or a high court judge. And Scotland, in recognition of that, want all new social housing sprinklered, and that's been the case from March 2021. And all new multi-occupied shared residential buildings with more than 6 persons now need to be sprinklered in Scotland, any new build. Now, that will pick up larger HMOs, but actually what they were gunning for really wasn't traditional HMOs. It was really to particularly pick up supported housing. Supported housing is a disaster waiting to happen. This very night, there will be supported housing throughout the UK. And you know what I mean by supported housing. It's typically, sometimes it's purpose-built, but very often it's just a large house that's been converted into supported housing for vulnerable people who are living as a semi-family unit, usually with a carer on the premises. And what I was about to say was, this very night, there will be supported housing in which there's one carer available during the night, and that carer will have to assist the first service user from the property if there's a fire, go back into a house that's on fire and bring out the second person, go back into a house that's on fire and bring out the third person. And that's not imaginary, that's real. And the fire strategy is try not to have a fire during the night. And in recognition of that particular problem, any supported housing with more than 6 persons, and when it's converted into supported housing, will need to be sprinklered in Scotland. Now, just in case you think that I'm presenting a very glowing picture of Scotland just because of the accent with which I speak. I'll give you a couple of negatives in Scotland. All new high-rise blocks of flats in Scotland now need 2 staircases. And that was a decision by the minister, contrary to the ministerial advisory group who told them, do not do this. And the minister made the decision almost unilaterally that he wanted 2 staircases in all new high-rise blocks of flats. He described it himself as a political decision. Now, for many of us, describing something as a political decision is a bit of a sort of pejorative term. He doesn't see anything wrong with that. Maybe he's just very honest. But he accepts that it's not based on any evidential, anything evidential that's presented to him or a rationale. It's just he fancies having 2 staircases. And flat entrance doors in high-rise blocks of flats. This is not new. This has been around for some years. Flat entrance doors in high-rise blocks of flats need 60 minutes fire resistance, as opposed to 30 minutes in England. Now, it will not matter in the vast majority of cases whether the door's got 30 minutes or 60 minutes, because it'll withstand a burnout anyway. So it's a bit like saying, I've got to get to Cornwall for tomorrow morning, and I better go in a Porsche because that'll get me there quicker than a Mini. It really won't make any difference if you're going to stick to the 70-mile-an-hour speed limit and you're only trying to get there tomorrow morning. I suppose it depends where you start from, right enough. But it won't make any difference. And there are social housing providers who are changing 30-minute flat entrance doors, sometimes that were installed post the Lacanal house fire. They're now changing them for 60-minute flat entrance doors post the Grenfell Tower fire at a cost typically of £2,000 per flat. Now, if you had £2,000 to spend, you could blanket probably every dwelling in the borough with smoke alarms. And we know statistically that if your house has one or more working smoke alarms and there's a fire, the chances of having a death is reduced by a factor of 8. Makes a huge difference. But, you know, people can spend their money as they wish, or the ratepayers' money as they wish. And lastly, the competence of fire risk assessors. I said at the beginning, this is a huge topic, very important topic. Not a tremendous amount to say about it, you'll be pleased to know. But as I've already mentioned, the new Building Safety Act may result in a competence requirement. There is a competence standard that some of you may be aware of for fire risk assessors. It's used by people like the IFE as a benchmark when they register fire risk assessors as competent, originally produced by a body known as the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Council. It was a task and finish group of 35 stakeholders. That competence standard has now been taken over by the Fire Sector Federation and is available as a download from the FSF website. As I said, competence under the Building Safety Act won't require certification, sadly. And I think a big question is, will there be sufficient competent fire risk assessors in the future? People are leaving the profession, partly because of what I described as the madness to begin with, partly because of all the changes to legislation. A lot of really good, competent fire risk assessors are ex-fire officers. Might be some here tonight. I saw one who works for me. I hope he's not leaving the profession. But they're on a pension. Some of them are saying, do we really want this hassle anymore? It's becoming incredibly difficult to get professional indemnity insurance. And even if you can get it, you'll probably get it with a cladding exclusion, which is very dangerous because some fire risk assessors are kind of sleepwalking into liability because they say, well, we don't give cladding advice, so our PI insurers have excluded any advice we give on cladding. So what? Well, the so what is they may well face allegations, whether right or wrong, that, well, you did a fire risk assessment a few years ago. Home Office say that they've had to clarify it for you, that that external walls and cladding were always part of the fire safety order. Why did you not look at it? And you know, if you get a sniff of a claim, a lot of my work involves expert witness work, but we see clients who, not necessarily in this particular context, but we see clients who are having a claim for this, that, or the other threatened. And the cost of dealing with a threat of a claim before any proceedings were issued is about £40,000. So trading without PI cover that includes cladding could be quite risky, and you can understand why people are saying, let's just forget it. Our own professional indemnity insurance cover, which right enough does have cladding within the scope, but has increased by 500%. So there was a meeting of the great and the good of the fire safety world about 6 weeks ago. The Institution of Fire Engineers got all the great and good together, including the other professional bodies. That's to say, the Institute of Fire Prevention Officers and the Institute of Fire Safety Managers to talk about the future for fire risk assessors and fire risk assessments. And everyone was talking about a sector that was in crisis. And I don't think that's hyperbole, really, because as a kind of last straw almost, and it's certainly my last slide, you'll be pleased to know, the question arises, have we lost sight of the ball as to what a fire risk assessment was meant to be about? Because, of course, before the fire safety order came into force, we had certification under the Fire Precautions Act. And many of us were critical of fire officers, and I'll put my hands up to being one of them sometimes, for being too prescriptive, too code hugging and so on. But the one thing they never did was walk away from an unsafe building. To the extent that if anybody died in certificated premises, we all sat up in shock. And we can all remember the fires where that happened. The only one I can think of off the top of my head, that again, people might remember, the fire at the Penhallow Hotel in Newquay in Cornwall, August 2007. 3 people died, and that was a certificated hotel. And that was the first multiple fatality fire in a certificated hotel. Well, in a hotel, I think, probably, since 1969. Because certification worked incredibly well. And we just said, it's not possible. 3 people can't die in a certificated hotel. So certification worked. But what did it involve? It did not involve, and this is not in any way implied criticism of fire officers, it did not involve them poking in every riser, looking for every tiny little bit of fire stopping. They looked at the big showstoppers. Are the means of escape reasonable? Is there automatic fire detection if it's a sleeping risk? Are the fire doors in reasonable condition? They weren't looking at every square inch of the building. They did a thorough job. I'm not saying they didn't, but they wouldn't necessarily do as much as a fire risk assessor did. And yet nobody died after they'd been there in general. It's the old 80-20 rule. You know, you've got something you try to achieve, you can get 80% there with just 20% of the effort that it would take to get 100% of the way there. And they concentrated on the big hitting points. Fire risk assessment came along, and we all said, well, if we do as well as the fire officers did under certification, we'll be doing pretty well. And we'll probably do a bit more from a liability point of view in terms of looking at the detail of the building. And that was supported by government, who also said in the guidance documents, if your building was recently built or altered under building regulations, you'll probably have nothing to do. So what we were expecting really from fire risk assessments was, is the building still being managed properly? Fire safety management is where it's at in terms of fire safety in non-domestic premises. Is the building being managed? Has there been any deterioration of the fire safety measures? Have there been unauthorized alterations? That's about it. Now, what will the Grenfell Tower inquiry have to say about the duties of a fire risk assessor? Well, that's extraordinarily contentious. It's a matter of public record. I have to watch what I say because I'm an expert witness for the public inquiry. And my view would not be the same as another expert witness to the public inquiry, and the public inquiry will make up its own mind. But it's a matter of public record that the fire risk assessor for Grenfell Tower was described by one expert witness as reckless because he didn't verify for himself the fire performance of the cladding. Now, it's also a matter of public record that he expressed concern about the cladding. He included a recommendation in the action plan of his fire risk assessment that someone needs to check with building control, does that cladding comply with the building regulations? In fact, he went further than that. He didn't just say the cladding, he said, and its methods of support. Then he checked with the contractors and asked the contractors, has it been checked that this cladding complies with the building regulations? And he was described as reckless for taking people's word for it. As I say, the public inquiry is big enough and ugly enough to make up its own mind, but we'll have to wait and see. But the question I suppose I'd put is there now an expectation that a fire risk assessment is some counsel of perfection? And we do see some fire and rescue services almost adopting a strict liability principle that, hey, there was a fire and it spread through the roof void. Bet the fire risk assessor never went up there. Fire risk assessment can't have been suitable and sufficient. Or the fire spread via some unseen means that the fire risk assessor couldn't possibly have seen with a visual inspection. There would need to be an intrusive inspection. That some fire authorities have taken the view, well, the fire risk assessment said everything was all right. Can't have been, because there was spread of fire. And again, that I'm sorry to end on a downer, on a sort of depressing note, but that's all part of the crisis that the fire risk assessment sector is facing. And it goes back to my question, will we have competent fire risk assessors, whatever that looks like, or sufficient competent fire risk assessors in the future? Thanks very much.
Okay. Oh, thank you. You rather surprised me there, Colin. Can you hear me okay? Can you, the internet now is getting a little bit sporadic at the moment, so I hope you can hear me okay. That's great. Thank you, Colin. That was a lot of information there and delving and a reread with that. That's wonderful. What we do have, there's a few people diving off now, but we do have questions, and just coming to that now. So question one is, our first one was, when undertaking a fire risk assessment, what is the criteria for electing to follow BS 9999 over the building regs regarding travel distances, etc.? Is it ever wrong not to use BS 9999, or how you pronounce it?
Right, okay. So BS 9999 is intended primarily for new buildings, but I get the question because it does actually say in 9999 that you could use it as a basis for a fire risk assessment in an existing building. So I suppose the question, I'm not sure what's behind the question, but it may be if we meet a building with travel distances that exceed those typically adopted under other codes of practice, could we reevaluate the building under BS 9999? That may be but what's behind the question. And the answer is possibly, but you can't cherry pick. You can't just pick that table from 9999 because you like that one, you know, and say, I think I'll have that table because that suits me. So you'd have to look at the whole building in the context of 9999, including management standards and so on. But I suppose, you know, the argument is, well, under 9999, I could, if all the other things are 9999 compliant, I could build a building that way today. So why should I not say in the fire risk assessment that the travel distances are acceptable. You just have to sometimes watch that you don't then get cut out by hose lengths for fire service and so on. So you just have to watch that if you actually tear the backside, if you pardon the expression, out the 999 travel distances to their maximum, you may end up having a conflict with firefighting facilities. But otherwise, I hope that's gives some idea of an answer.
Thank you. Right, next question. With all the proposed checks to flat entrance doors, how will this impact against a resident's right to quiet enjoyment and the ability to carry out those inspections if residents refuse access?
Right, so the party line on that of government is that when you come to a block of flats, residents will now need to understand that an Englishman's home is no longer his castle, particularly if that would result in other people in the same block being put at risk. And that's why the Building Safety Act would bring about a change that would allow a right of access for the accountable person. That's a big step. You know, I was going to say step forward. I'm not sure whether it's a step forward, but it's a step. And I love that term, quiet enjoyment in leases. Well, you know, if they've got somebody knocking on their door every 3 months, they don't get quiet enjoyment for very long. But the 3 months is impracticable. But it will just be a fact that it will be an accepted fact. If you live in a block of flats, then unfortunately you will need to cooperate with making sure that you don't actually put other people at risk.
Very relevant.
And not all leaseholders will see it that way. If anybody hears from the property sector, they will know that you sometimes have to get a court order to do the statutory gas checks. And I can see there being a need for court orders to check self-closers as well.
Sad indictment, isn't it, really? Okay, and another query, evac chairs or lift keys? Query there.
Evac chairs or lift keys? What the question is, should people use, I take it, are we talking about residential or non-domestic? Do you know what the...
It doesn't say. Bridget, she's still here, but I think it's just an either or both, but there's no elaboration there.
I think you missed the top of the question. The question was, Colin mentioned about the PEEP process, and the full question, what I've written is, there was a suggestion at the inquiry that the PEEP process would involve enabling family members to support evacuation. For example, using evac chairs or lift keys. I mean, they didn't give any examples, but I wondered whether Colin had any ideas on what that meant when they said that families might support people through PEEPs. Yeah,
there is a school of thought. I mean, there's two very, I'm sure you know, there's two very divergent schools of thought. One is in blocks of flats, PEEPs are impracticable. And another school of thought is that they're a non-negotiable and that it can involve friends, so-called friends and family. I think it needs to be tailor-made for every individual resident. What they actually need is something, and this is the strange paradox, they actually need something more than a PEEP. They actually need what we call a person-centered fire risk assessment, because it's all very well to talk about how they're going to get out if there's a large-scale evacuation of the block. But 100 times more likely than that is a fire in their own flat. And how are they going to get out? Or how are you going to deal with that? And that involves really that question is no different from this person is living in a bungalow in the middle of a field and they have a fire in their bungalow. What do they do? And the one thing you don't do is say, well, it's tough. You know, they can't have a PEEP for a bungalow, so not a lot you can do. There's masses you can do. So you try and make sure they don't have a fire in the first place. And there's lots of ways you can go about that. to give other people time for questions, I'm not going to go into the detail, but you get the idea, I'm sure. That you try and make sure they don't have a fire. You give them telecare monitoring to get the fire and rescue service there quickly if they do have a fire. You blanket their property with smoke alarms, and if necessary, you put in a suppression system. Well, you move this person from the bungalow to a flat, you'll probably need to go to all the same efforts, and that will be to deal with the likelihood of a fire in their own flat. Now we've got to actually get them out if there's a more general evacuation. I worry about friends and family trying to use an evac chair and try and maneuver people down a stairway when firefighters are trying to come up the stairway. And I'm not sure about the practicality of it. Lifts are great, but if it's a firefighting lift, it'll be taken over by the fire and rescue service. But at that stage, the fire and rescue service are there and can assist in rescues if required. Because at the end of the day, if the fire's not in their own flat, how do they know there's a need to evacuate? Because there's no communal fire alarm system. And they'll know there's a need to evacuate when the fire service decide they have to evacuate. And at that stage, legally, the fire and rescue service are in charge of the building. They have legal charge of the building, and they will assist with the evacuation. But if you do want friends and family, having a sort of race for the lift is a bit chaotic. Evacuation lifts are brilliant. But they need management. They're great in managed buildings. And so it's really tricky. If the fire's in their own flat, by the way, there's probably no reason why they can't go down in the lift when they leave their flat, because at that stage, the lift hasn't grounded. The fire in the flat, there's no reason why it would have affected the power supply to a normal lift. All the other residents, they won't know about this fire because there's no fire alarm system. So they're going up and down in the lift. So why shouldn't the disabled person go down in the lift to get out the block? These are incredibly tricky areas, and that's why I think the Home Office haven't come up with legislation yet, because there are no easy answers other than trying to tailor-make it for the individual person. But I would come back to the fact you should be doing that anyway for a disabled person. Sorry, I'm not sure if that's answered the lady's question to the extent she wanted.
No, that was fine. It's fine, thank you.
I have, yes. That's yeah, I think so. Thank you, Colin, on that. There's from Karen, last but one. One of the key problems in blocks of flats is the mix of general tenants and leasehold tenants. What are the plans to cover these contingencies whereby leaseholders may not be financially willing or able to support the increasing requirements? Where do you?
I think, yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. I feel sorry for leaseholders because they bought their flat under right to buy legislation. They were encouraged by government to buy their flat and for everyone to become a homeowner. And now, if they're in a block of flats under 18 metres in height and they've got hazardous cladding, the best government can do for them is give them a loan. They understandly feel quite, well, I don't know quite, I was trying to find a polite word for shafted, but well, I'll just use shafted for speed. I mean, the thing is to get things in proportion for leaseholders, and I'm not sure that people have always been proportionate. I'm not sure people are being proportionate today in terms of deciding a unilateral policy. Let's upgrade all fire resisting doors. And by the way, you, the leaseholder, are going to pay for this whim we've got. If the leaseholder has changed the door, which is quite often the case because they see the removal of the old council door and a door from B&Q as a sort of badge. I bought my own flat. Look, I've got a nice B&Q door. And sadly, they should have realised that should be a fire-resisting door. But then, did anybody tell them? And again, this is about engagement with residents so that they actually understand the fire precautions in the block. It's not just about, well, in the event of fire, dial 999 and leave the block. It's about having this resident engagement whereby the residents feel part of the whole fire safety picture and understand how the block is meant to work. And I hope I'm not being naive when I say, if people understand fire precautions, they're much less likely to undermine them. But leaseholders are going to be caught undoubtedly for upgrading, and we've not seen the end of it yet. And it's a political question as to how that gets resolved.
Yeah, I think that's, we'll just come to the, thank you for that, Colin. There is a quick comment as well from Colin, another Colin, I think, it hasn't got the name distinctive there. Why are 2 staircases a negative?
Why are 2 staircases what, sorry?
A negative.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it in terms of cost effectiveness, you can't really justify it. I mean, Scotland rushed ahead with that without any research basis or evidence basis. England, to be fair, are taking a much longer term look at that, and they haven't ruled out 2 staircases. But the thing is, what do you want 2 staircases for? And when you ask people, why do you want 2 staircases? They can't always rationalize it. And the reason you need to ask them is not because it's a rhetorical question and you think you'll catch them out. Is because how you design the 2 staircases will depend on why you wanted them in the first place. I sat on a committee in Scotland and to look at, well, how do you design the 2 staircases? And someone said to the Fire and Rescue Service, what do you want them for? And the Fire and Rescue Service said, we didn't want them in the first place. Don't ask us. And they didn't mean that they were against them, but they didn't have a notion as to why they were required. So if you want them because you think one staircase may fail and the residents will need to use the other staircase in the event of a mass evacuation, well, that has design implications to make sure that you don't have a common mode failure and that you have fire separation between the 2 staircases. If, on the other hand, you want 2 staircases because you want to keep one for the Fire and Rescue Service and one for the residents, that's a whole different situation. And then you need to make sure that the residents can't use the second staircase. So it depends why you think you want it, and nobody has really rationalized why they want it. That's why I said it was a negative, because it's a very expensive and difficult requirement without any defined rationale. That was the reason.
Hi, Colin. It was me that asked the question, and it's just in terms of generally, the principle of evacuation or escape is that you have 2 choices generally. You can turn your back on the fire and use a different escape route. So that's...
Yeah, no, I
rationale.
No, I kind of get that, and it kind of feels right. I know it kind of feels right, and as people start to build taller and taller and taller, then maybe it's a requirement. But you know, you're talking about a 7-story block of flats with a stay put strategy, and if you build it right, then you won't be evacuating everybody, and your staircase will be clear, and you've got the smoke control provisions. I mean, you have two staircases in a hotel, but that's because you might lose one. But in a hotel, you don't have smoke control in the lobby that's specifically designed to keep the staircase clear. So you don't expect to lose the staircase. So it's a kind of knee-jerk reaction that it kind of just feels right, rather than something that there's actual evidence for. I mean, in England, they do accept that there needs to be further research on this, and they haven't ruled it out, but they want to take their time and make a rational decision rather than than kind of rushing into anything, you know, on the basis that more must be better.
Okay, I think we'll have to leave it there now, as we have gone over time now, but extremely useful session. And we really do, there's lots of thank yous to you, Colin, for the time tonight. So we really appreciate it. Our next talk is on, where are we, 6th of December. And with provisionally Michael Emery, isn't it, Scott? I think you're still in charge of that. And thank you, Scott, for organising the talk with Colin as well. That's been great. Thank you. You're okay for the 6th, aren't you, for December still? Or
Yep.
still going to be confirmed yet?
Yeah, 6th of December.
For Michael Emery.
Yep, Michael on the 6th. Yep. Thank you, Colin.
Yep.
Appreciate that. Really good session.
Really.
You're very, very welcome. I can hear a steak sizzling, so I'll take my leave of you if you don't mind.
Thank you so much. Thank
Nice
you.
to see you, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And
Thanks.
look
Bye-bye.
at the website. Thank you.